Hey guys, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about a deck that gets very large threats out very early based on a few lands that if you get them together, then gives you a lot of mana. And it's called Green Tron because we use a little bit of green mana along with it, mostly colorless though. Okay, and this is part of the Epic on a Budget series, so it costs under $20. I'm going off TCG player prices. If you click the link in the description below, you'll find the deck list, and it might be pulling some other prices that will likely be a little higher. TCG player tends to be a pretty good budget option. All right, so let's get into it. The main idea is to get these three lands together. Okay, Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Urza's Tower. They each tap for a single colorless by themselves, but if you have the other two, then they each tap for more. So Urza's Tower taps for 3, Urza's Power Plant taps for 2, and Urza's Mine taps for 2 as well. So together they tap for 7 colorless mana. So then you just have a bunch of very large threats that cost colorless mana, and you're off to the races. Okay, so let's get into the deck list with the mana curve and all. The mana curve on this one is a little bit less important than it would otherwise be, but still important, still something to talk about. Okay, so the lands, like I said, Urza's Tower, Urza's Power Plant, Urza's Mine, those are our really important cards in the deck. That's what the whole deck is built around. So we have those, and then we have Sanctum of Ugin. Because we do have some land searches, land tutors, such as Expedition Map or Sylvan Scrying that can find us our lands. Well, what if we already have the lands we need? These lands we need, and we want something else, something useful from our land searches. Well, Sanctum of Ugin can be something you get. Since we are casting large colorless spells, then we get to trigger this fairly often because Sanctum of Ugin is a land that taps for a single colorless, but whenever you cast a colorless spell with converted mana cost 7 or greater, mana value 7 or greater, you can sacrifice Sanctum of Ugin and go search your library for a colorless creature card. That colorless creature does not have to be mana value 7 or greater, just any colorless creature card. And then you put it into your hand, obviously revealing it, and shuffle your library. So that just helps us find whatever we need and get some extra value, like I said, out of the land searches, because then you can basically turn the land search into a colorless creature, i.e. threat search. Okay. We do have 4 forests, because like I said, we are going to be using a little bit of green mana to help us. You'll notice this Sylvan Scrying involves green mana. That's one of our main land searches. Okay. Blast Zone is another utility land we have in here. It enters with a charge counter, and it taps for a single colorless. But you can pay X and XX and tap it to put X charge counters on it. And the other ability is then you can pay 3 and tap and sacrifice it to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on it. Okay, that's rather useful because we don't actually have a lot of low mana value permanents that we care about, non-land permanents, and so that we can blow up all the 2-drops, for example, with utter impunity. So that's just a nice little useful land. That's definitely something you will want to keep in mind when you're searching for, if you have a land search available and you already have your 3 main lands. Okay, so that's really the mana base, and then the bulk of the deck honestly is getting those lands in play, because the idea is you want those lands in play out by turn 3, ideally, or if not, by turn 4 to have 8 mana, because you can do that if you just have each of those, one of each of those plus a forest, for example, or plus a blast zone or Sanctum of Ugin. Okay, so the idea is turn 3, 7 mana, or turn 4, 8 mana. Okay, we'll get into a little bit more about that in a second. Okay, so for a single mana, we have Expedition Map. This is definitely the cleanest land search because it's an artifact that costs a single colorless mana. So we can play it on turn 1 with any one of our 3 main lands. Okay. And then on the next turn, we can activate it. This ability, pay 2 mana, tap it, sacrifice it, and you get to go search your library for a land and put it into your hand. So you can obviously do that on the same turn if you are casting this later in the game, but for our main purpose, the plan is to activate it on turn 2 after playing the second Tron land, Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, or Urza's Tower, and then go get the third one, which we can then play on turn 3 and play something huge. Okay, so the Exposition Map is incredibly important for this deck. All right, the other one, like I said, is Sylvan Scrying, the other land search. This is a sorcery that costs 2 mana, 1 and a green. Okay, and you search your library for land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, and shuffle. Okay, so obviously we need a green mana, and that is where Chromatic Star and Chromatic Sphere come into play. Okay, because you can play one of these, Chromatic Sphere or Chromatic Star, on turn 1. They're both just artifacts that cost a single colorless mana, and they have the ability pay 1 and tap it, sacrifice it to get a mana of any color. And then both of them draw you a card as well, barring graveyard shenanigans, because one of them technically draws you a card as part of the ability, the other one it has to go to the graveyard to draw you the card. But that basically you just play it on turn 1, and then on turn 2 you can pay a colorless mana, tap it and sacrifice it to get a green, and you draw a card, and then you use another colorless mana to pay for the Sylvan Scrying, get your third land, and then you can play it on turn 3. So that's another main game plan. Okay. Then we have Ancient Stirrings, which is useful throughout the game. It costs a single green mana, and you look at the top 5 cards of your library. It's a sorcery. And you can reveal a colorless card from among them, put it into your hand, and then the rest go on the bottom of the library in any order. Okay. That early game can be used to find either a land or an expedition map, or it can be used to find a threat. Okay, so late game, we're definitely going to be using it to find some of our big stuff, ideally. Now, that does provide a nice little bit of consistency, but it still does cost green, and green is a little bit scarce in this deck. But that's okay. Also, one thing to keep in mind, since these Chromatic Sphere and Chromatic Stars draw you a card, later in the game you often just play them and sacrifice them to draw a card. That's pretty typical. Okay. This whole package, though, is actually remarkably effective at getting you to 7 mana on turn 3 most of the time, and when it doesn't, it generally gets you to 8 mana on turn 4. Okay. So most of our big threats then are going to be 7 mana spells, but we do also have some 8 mana stuff. Okay. Sometimes you don't actually get all the mana that you would like, and so we do also have a couple backup plans. Okay. Stonecoil Serpent is a backup plan here. It costs X, and it's an artifact creature, enters with 0/0 that enters with X +1/+1 encounters, and it has Reach and Trample and Protection from Multicolored. Reach and Trample are very frequently useful. Protection from Multicolored is a little less useful most of the time, but occasionally it's very helpful. But it's really nice because if you get 7 mana, you can have a 7/7 with Reach and Trample. That can win you games, or at least stall games until you can win with something else. However, you can cast it for X = 2 or X = 3. If you're just trying to keep yourself alive, it's rather good at blocking, especially with Reach, right? So that's one reason why we have that in the deck. is so that if something does go wrong, you do have an option for something for a little less mana. Oblivion Stone is just an all-around powerhouse in this deck. It costs 3. It's an artifact that costs 3 mana, and it has 2 abilities. You can pay 4 and tap it, put a fate counter on a permanent. And the other ability is you can pay 5 and tap it and sacrifice it, destroy each non-land permanent without a fate counter on it, and then you remove all fate counters from all permanents. Okay. So we use this in a couple different ways. One is, especially if we don't hit our lands until turn 4, sometimes that's because we needed to use a forest as a green source, and so we used our turn 2 land drop with a forest, so we don't get to the third Tron land until turn 4, or it just took an extra turn to find all your lands. Okay, we will likely be a little bit behind in the game, right? Because we have been basically doing nothing on the battlefield, while our opponent has most likely been doing stuff. Okay, so you can just cast this for 3 and then activate it for 5 on turn 4 and destroy all non-land permanents. That's a pretty good way, honestly, to get back in the game, right? Stabilize, because then you can, on your next turn, play something big that is likely bigger than whatever they played on their next turn. Okay, so that's one option. Another option is actually if there is some problem with our mana, whether that's it just took us a long time to find our lands, or people countered our Sylvan Scrying or something, you'll mess us up a little bit. We can cast it for 3 and activate it for 5, so we never have to get up to 7 mana. Okay, and some combination of Oblivion Stones and Stonecoil Serpents can keep you in the game for a little bit while you are trying to find your lands. Next up, we have Steel Hellkite. Oh, sorry. The other way we use Oblivion Stone is actually using that fate counter ability. You can, for example, have a threat out, and then you play this, put a fate counter on your insert large threat here, and then the next turn blow up everything else. That's a pretty good way to kind of seal the game, especially because many of these threats will remove our opponent's stuff consistently. So let's get into that. So these now are going to be our big threats. Steel Kite is it only costs 6, so again you can technically cast it without getting up to 7 mana. You won't do that terribly often, but it occasionally might come in handy. But it's just got a super useful ability that lets us destroy basically anything, provided we can get combat damage through. So it's a 5/5 with flying. Just that's the static stats and ability. But you can pay 2 mana to give it +1/+0 until end of turn. So that's nice. You can sometimes just finish off an opponent with that, especially because you have a lot of mana. But the other thing you can do is if you've dealt combat damage to them, you can pay with Steel Hellkite that turn, you can pay X, any amount of X mana, to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to X that they control, the opponent controls. Okay, like I said, this is only if it's dealt combat damage to them. But that's a really good way. Oh, and you can only do that once per turn. It's a really good way to get rid of a lot of tokens, for example, because you can just pay X equals 0. Or a bunch of 1-drops or a bunch of 2-drops, whatever. You can also say something has hexproof. Well, it doesn't target it, so you can still destroy it. It's very good at getting rid of a lot of things. Every once in a while you run into a deck that has a lot of flyers and it won't be quite so easy, but eh, then it's at least just a 5/5 with flying, so you can block and do combat stuff. Okay, next up we have Bane of Balaged. Alrighty, so 7 mana gets you a 7/5 with whenever it attacks, the defending player exiles 2 permanents he or she controls. This is a really good way to just repeatedly get rid of your opponent's board, and importantly, it gets exiled. They exile it and they don't sacrifice it. So a lot of things that trigger, oh, when it dies, or everyone's using their graveyard nowadays, um, they don't get any of that value, right? It's gone. So that's very useful. It can be blocked, by a decent number of creatures because it only has 5 toughness, so it can be blocked and killed. But it will generally kill whatever blocks it. So they're often going down 3 permanents, but at least 2. At the very least, they go down by 2 when this attacks. So that's like a super useful way to just make sure you win the game, is just repeatedly getting rid of their permanents. And that includes lands, right? So pretty soon they're just not going to be able to really do anything. Okay, and then next up we have Meteor Golem. This doesn't provide as much long-term, repeated value, but it's a 7 mana 3/3 that destroys a non-land permanent an opponent controls when it enters the battlefield. And that is really nice because it's targeted. Okay, so it's nice to have a mixture of targeted and non-targeted removal like that, because Bane of Balaged, gets rid of 2 things per turn, which is kind of crazy. But Meteor Golem gets rid of 1 thing that you choose, right? Because definitely the problem with Bane of Balaged is that your opponent chooses what permanents. So if you are about to die because of some big thing, Bane of Balaged won't necessarily help you because they can just sacrifice a couple lands and then swing in or whatever, right? Meteor Golem, though, is going to be great in that context because you just get rid of that thing, right? And then as a 3/3, it can block a decent number of things, and it can at least chump block, right? Because once it's landed, you don't really need it around anymore. Okay, so that's that, and then we have Ulamog's Crusher. This is an 8/8, so most things can't block it and survive. And most things can't block it and kill it, which is very nice. It has Annihilator 2, so whenever it attacks, the defending player sacrifices 2 permanents. So it's a little bit like Bane of Valagad, except they sacrifice them, they don't exile them. Okay, and this Ulamog's Crusher does attack each combat if able, so not a super great blocker, except right after it's played when it has Summon Sickness, right? Or play it in the second main phase. Okay, so those are all the cards. One of the really important things while playing this deck is knowing how to mulligan. So we're going to be going over that a little bit in the playtester as well. But just in theory, we really want to get our lands. The lands are the most important part of this deck because we have a number of threats or threat equivalents, right? So we have Stonecoil Serpent, we have 4 of them, 4 Oblivion Stones, because while this isn't necessarily a threat damage-wise or whatever, blowing up the board's pretty good. So we have, let's see, 22 threats or threat equivalents. That's a lot. And so we're likely to draw them. We don't have to worry in our mulliganing, we don't have to worry terribly much about having a threat or not, or exactly what threat we have. We have to just worry about the lands, basically. Threats are nice to have in our opening hand, okay? Especially because we have Chromatic Spheres, we have Chromatic Stars, we have Ancient Stirrings. Those can all help us get to threats, right? And we even have, Sanctum of Ugin, is another way to get a threat. You know, you can turn one threat, any of those, you can turn one of those into another threat, right? So there are a lot of ways of finding threats, and just a whole lot of them in the deck. What there aren't a lot of is, well, Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, or Urza's Tower. There's only 4 of each. So we really care about uh, focusing on that. So in the opening hand, you really want to ensure that you have a way to get those 3 lands. Uh, and you should mulligan aggressively to get them. Okay, this is basically a combo deck in a lot of ways, right? Combo those 3 lands. And you should definitely, be keeping in mind, okay, do I have um, a path to get all 3 of them? If you mulligan a couple times, you start being a little bit looser. So I wouldn't count Ancient Stirrings as a way to find a 3rd land in my, if I've just started drawing, right? My first draw. Um, if I'm only going to be keeping 4 cards, yeah, I'll count Ancient Stirrings as a way to get something, right? Because it can either get the land, it can get an expedition map, it can get an Oblivion Stone to keep me in the game a little bit, or Stonecoil Serpent to keep me in the game if I'm struggling that much, okay? But you really, really want to think about, okay, how many of these lands do I have? Um, Ideally, you have 2 of these, and you have an expedition map, or you have a chromatic sphere, or chromatic star, and a sylvan scrying, because um, either one of those combinations gets you your 3rd land. If you have, though, like a Urza's Tower, so you have one of these and a forest, and then an expedition map and a sylvan scrying, then you're looking more at like a turn 4, which could be okay. If you're playing against a really aggressive deck, then you might not want to keep that, right? If you feel like you do have enough time, especially if you have an Oblivion Stone also in your hand, maybe that's a keeper, right? But just you want to keep those things in mind so that you have a good solid game plan, because this deck really can struggle if you don't get those lands, right? So if you play 2 of these and then you're playing a forest and then a blast zone, you're probably going to die. Okay, if your opponent's doing very much. Um, there are a few things to keep you in the game a little bit, but it basically is to keep you in the game until you can find your other land and start playing bigger stuff. Um, and a lot of decks will just be a little too powerful to really keep up with just a Stonecoil Serpent. Okay, so that's really what we want to prioritize with our mulliganing. Okay, so let's head over to the playtester. Okay. So what we have here, we have an Urza's Mine, we have a land search, we have a Sanctum of Ugin. Okay, and there's not really any way for us to get actually even the 2nd land, because we don't have a green source for the Sylvan Scrying. So I would say this is definitely not a keeper. Okay, so let's mulligan. Okay, now here we don't have any of them. That's rough, and we only have 1 land. So even though we have 2 land searches, we're not actually going to be able to pay the activation cost for activation map or pay the cost for Sylvan Scrying. So I would again mulligan. Okay, now here we have Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine. So we have 2 of them. And we have an Ancient Stirrings and a Forest. Okay, and we have a turn 8. We have an Ulamog's Crusher. And we have another turn 8. Sorry, not turn 8. Turn 4, 8 mana value Ulamog's Crusher. Turn 4, 8 mana value Oblivion Stone. So I would actually keep this. I'm going to have to put 2 cards back already. So I just don't think it's worth going down anymore, since I do have, um, you know, a way to hopefully get the third one. And I'll have to put back 2 anyway. I'm going to keep the Oblivion Stone um, as just probably the best way to stay in the game. Okay, so let's put that on the bottom, and then we keep this. Okay, so turn 1, we're going to play Urza's Tower, and then pass turn. Okay, we're hoping that we'll draw something. Okay, well, we didn't draw anything yet, so we'll just pass the turn. Okay, we have another Urza's Mine. So right now, I'm going to play the Forest and play Ancient Stirrings. Okay, look at the top 5 cards. All right, Urza's Power Plant, perfect. Okay, that's exactly what we needed. If we hadn't gotten that though, well, here's an expedition map. So we could have gotten that. Or, if we were really unlucky and hadn't gotten either of those, you could at least grab a Stonecoil Serpent as a way to, chump block something, right? So we'll toss the rest of these on the bottom of the library. And then we can pass the turn. We'll play there's Power Plant. And then with our 8 mana, we can play this, sacrifice it, tap it and sacrifice it, and destroy all non-land permanents. And see, we didn't really keep any other threats, but between then and now, we've gotten 2, right? So depending on what your opponent played, and your life totals and all that, you could figure out what's the best option here. You could even play both of these if you really needed to. Like you could play a Steel Hellkite, and if they had something, maybe they played something small, you could play Stonecoil Serpent for X equals 4 as a way to block while you attack in with Steel Hellkite, for example. That could work. Or you could save Stonecoil Serpent for another turn, right? And then we draw. Okay, it probably would have been good in this case if we'd kept Stonecoil Serpent, but just another option. Okay, Blast Zone. So this would be a pretty good way to blow up anything that they've played. And here we get another threat. And this whole time you've been swinging in the Steel Hellkite. If they don't have flying blockers, you've already won the game. You've been able to destroy stuff, right? Like, if they had a lot of spot removal, maybe you weren't able to do that, but you had a pretty good run, right? Like, there are pretty good odds of succeeding at this game, right? Especially if your opponent didn't have a lot of spot removal. But if they had a lot of spot removal, they probably didn't have a lot of other cards left over. So you might have still won, when you get your other threat out. So anyways, so that's basically how this deck worked this time. Let's try just one more, just to see what we get here. Okay, so we have Urza's Power Plant, and we have some other things, but not a second land. So I would say Mulligan. Okay, so here, perfect. We have Urza's Tower, Urza's Power Plant, Expedition Map. That's exactly what we need. Okay, so I would keep that. We're going to be tossing 1 card on the bottom, and really that would kind of depend on your mood, what you know about the deck you're playing against. If you think that a second Oblivion Stone is really worth it, then you keep that. I would probably toss this down and keep the Ancient Stirrings, personally. So I'll do that. But then this just plays out in a very ideal fashion. Turn 1, Expedition Map. Turn 2, we're going to play the second Tron land, crack the expedition map, go search for an Urza's Mine. Okay, and we're going to put that in our hand, and then pass turn. Okay, then we have all 7. We have a forest ready to go. For our next turn, we can use Ancient Stirrings, which is pretty nice. But let's play out Steel Hellkite. Okay. At this point, they might remove it. They might not. It might be able to block some stuff. On your next turn, if you still have it, right, you'd probably attack and use it however makes sense. We'll play that forest. But like one line is maybe they have a removal spell, so maybe they killed your Steel Hellkite. Then you've got nothing to lose. You might as well just blow up the board with the Oblivion Stone, right? Because now you have 8 mana. If your Steel Hellkite is still around, you can swing in with it, destroy some stuff if possible. If not, right, maybe they have a few little flyers, so attacking with it doesn't make a lot of sense. You could cast a Stonecoil Serpent, right, for X equals 8. That could be pretty good. You can also do Oblivion Stone for 3, and then put a Fate counter on Steel Hellkite for 4. And then you'd have a green mana left over for Ancient Stirrings. Like that, depending on how the the battlefield is and all that, that would probably be a pretty good option. Because if you have a Steel Hellkite and your opponent only has one thing, then that's often a pretty good way to just seal the deal, because you can just destroy whatever they cast. All right, so if you blow up everything besides your Steel Hellkite and then swing in, that's probably pretty good. You can also pump it, right? But let's see what the Ancient Strings gives us. We'll look at the top 5. Oh, okay, cool. So we get Bane of Balagad, right? But there were also a couple of lands. So the Ancient Strings is often rather helpful at just smoothing stuff out and giving you exactly what you need. Occasionally, you won't hit what you need, but often you do. Okay, so now you could just blow up everything except your Steel Hellkite. Remove the Fate counter. You have 3 mana left over. You could go search for something like a Blast Zone or something like that, with that extra land search that you don't really need. So anyways, you got some options. You could also, if you felt like it, go get Sanctum of Ugin and sacrifice it when you cast one of these to go find another one, another creature. So you've got lots of options, lots of very, very powerful plays late game, mid-late game. And it's a really fun deck to play, I feel like. It's just fun to play big, powerful stuff. And this deck is very, very effective at doing that rather consistently. It's very good at getting to 7 mana on turn 3 most of the time, like I said, and 8 mana on turn 4, oftentimes right after getting to 7 mana on turn 3, and sometimes, that when you get your big mana is on turn 4, but has a lot of ways of staying in the game and then taking over the game pretty definitively once you get going. So I think it's a ton of fun. Hopefully you enjoy it too. And let me know how it goes if you build the deck, play it, and definitely subscribe if you like this video. I'll be doing some more Epic on a Budget deck lists, and love to see you next time. Definitely let me know in the comments below if there's some other deck you'd like to see build. Have a good one.